Now it is our real pleasure, privilege to invite Professor Sujoy Ghosh, sir. Professor Sujoy Ghosh needs no introduction. Sir, currently professor at the Department of Endocrinology at SSKM Hospital, IPGMER. There are many accolades with sir. So now over to Professor Sujoy Ghosh, sir. Sir will tell us the role of sponsors and how we can assure good clinical practice. So over to Professor Sujoy Ghosh, sir.
Sir, please unmute yourself, sir. You are muted.
Am I audible now?
Yes.
Yes, sir.
Sorry for that. So a big thank you to both Dr. Shambhu as well as API for having given me this responsibility as well as opportunity. And I understand I need to finish my talk within half an hour, and I need to be try to be as precise as possible in terms of the roles and responsibilities of sponsors. So I think there are two documents that everyone attending this workshop has read or seen or will read. First of all, we all talk about the Declaration of Helsinki. The revised Declaration of Helsinki was published in JAMA in October 2024. I would request all of you to read that. And secondly, this is again from the Government of India, the draft guidelines of GCP published September 2024. These are two documents that whenever you're in trouble, if you can go back and read, it will help you guide in most of the circumstances. So when we talk about sponsors, obviously we are not talking about the sponsors of IPL. We are talking about individuals, companies, institutions, and organizations that take responsibility for the initiation, management, and financing of a trial. So the financial bit is just one bit of it. The responsibility is the bigger bit. That means it is responsible for everything related to the trial. So it could obviously be a commercial organization, like my respected previous speaker talked about MSD and GSK being sponsors of the cervical vaccine trial, or it could be a government funding agency, maybe ICMR, DBT, DST, or it could be even private foundations. For example, we've got research grants from certain organizations like, say, API, RSSDI, Chelaram Foundation, and things like that. And if you could find someone who's very philanthropic as an individual, could fund it as well. So in most of my talk, when I talk about sponsor, I am actually implying about a commercial partner who's actually helping us with a commercially driven trial, which could be a drug, which could be a device. Typically, such a sponsor will have a team of people at the back end. So there would be a project manager for each of the studies. Then there would be a clinical research associate or monitoring team. There could be a contract research organization. Say, for example, most of us working either in government or non-government organizations often do not have a research team of our own. There, the sponsor would lend out people from this CRO to help out in the day-to-day running of the trial. But remember, ultimately, the entire responsibility is both of that of the PI as well as that of the sponsored team. The vicarious responsibility lies with both. The CRO only helps you in your day-to-day running. Then there would be a data manager. We'll talk about these biostatisticians and medical writer. So the two most important things that the sponsor actually has to assure is quality assurance and quality control of the clinical trial. So all of the studies that are being conducted, the sponsor has to ensure that the data that is generated is documented properly, recorded in compliance with protocols, the GCP and the regulatory requirements. So they will also have to ensure that there is direct access to all trial related data, whether it's the source data, the documents and the reports, for all involved. So it could be for somebody coming and for monitoring purposes. It could be for auditing purposes. That could be from an internal auditor, an external agency, a government agency, a regulatory agency. Everybody should have access to it. And that all data that has been documented is reliable and is not fictitious and has been processed correctly. And to ensure that all agreements in writing with the parties involved in the trial are okay. So maybe I will take a pause here from the slides and try and walk you through what typically happens during a clinical trial. So the first thing the sponsor does is it tries to look for prospective PIs in different sites. Well, how that is chosen, that's often arbitrary. Maybe they will go to sites where they know there's a history of clinical trials there, to the major sites, or maybe to some of the private institutions where there's a history that somebody's done a clinical trial, or they know the PI has been doing such clinical trials, or a place where they know that such kinds of patients are coming, not necessarily they have done clinical trials in the past. Usually they will look for people with credibility, people of repute. So that's how they would approach these sites with the prospective PIs. They will reach out to them, and then the first document that is signed is a confidentiality agreement document. It essentially means that you're not going to talk about what's there in the clinical trial with somebody else or a rival company. So once you've done that, they will share some details about the clinical trial, what it entails. Thereafter, they will send you another form which is called the site feasibility assessment form. For example, if there's a clinical trial of obesity, they might say, okay, how many patients of obesity do you see with an average BMI on such and such? What do you think is going to be the number of people that you will be able to recruit? And then they will keep on asking other things. Okay, we'll be looking at this trial where we need to actually have a look at the body fat composition of these patients. So do you have a DEXA scanner? Do you have maybe an MR spectroscopy? Does your site have facilities for, say, a digital fundal photography and an OCT? Because we now know all GLP-1 trials, you need to actually have that because of the so-called risk of NION. So all of these things are actually there. So you fill up that feasibility form. Often the monitor will come for a feasibility visit to cross-check that whatever you're talking about is actually there in terms of the facilities and other things there. Once that's done, the sponsor will send you a whole list of documents in what is called the dossier of the study. With that, you need to actually apply to two bodies in your own organization. Often these two bodies are one body. So there will be one body, for example, in IPGMER where we work, which looks at the academic credibility of the trial, the research oversight committee or the research academic committee. Once they say this is a good enough study for our institute, then that is then has to be submitted to the institutional ethics committee. In many of the institutes, both of these jobs are done by one committee, the IRB. And then you will be asked to present your study there with the dossier which has all the documents. And there are certain things that, particularly during the ethics presentation, people will look at. Number one, what we discussed in the previous talk about consent. Is it just in one language, two languages, three languages? Is it just a Google Translate of the English consent form? Things like that. And the second thing is they will assess the ethical aspects of the study. And finally, also, they will look at the insurance amount that the sponsor is willing to pay just in case something goes wrong. The previous speaker was talking about that some patients died in that vaccine study. It does not happen necessarily need to be related to the study. Anything and everything that happens to the person who is enrolled in the trial will believe that it's because of the drug or the intervention that you've given. So once that's approved, then the ethics approves the study. There is then a tripartite agreement. The three parties involved will be number one, the sponsor. The second will be the PI. And the third will be the institutional head where we are working. So that's a tripartite agreement. So all of these are agreement documents that need to be in place and the sponsor has to arrange for the same. So we already talked about the CRO. The sponsor might transfer any or all of the sponsor's related duties and function to this outsourced agency to ensure that the quality and integrity of the trial is okay. But again, like I said, ultimate responsibility is both that of the sponsor as well as that of the PI. The medical expertise will be needed at various points of time. Of course, at the time of designing the study, and of course, all through the trial period, whenever there are issues where you need to reach out to the sponsor for help regarding medical management. The trial design, this is very important because you reap what you sow. So a good design study will actually lead to or yield good scientific data. So if the trial is designed poorly, the results are going to be poor in terms of interpretation and applicability. So that's understandable, and there are several people that the sponsor will include while designing the study. And in every clinical trial, there's a primary endpoint, a secondary endpoint. So all of those responsibilities are going to be the sponsor's responsibility. One of the important things that needs to be defined in the trial is when to stop, when to escalate. Because, for example, if I'm doing a diabetes study and I'm saying that this drug reduces blood glucose, and then the starting HbA1c is anywhere between, say, 7 and 10, what happens if the HbA1c goes, say, to 11 or 12? From an ethical point of view, you cannot allow that to continue. You need to have an add-on backup that, you have to allow add-on drug therapy. So things like that, or certain things in terms of side effects and other things that has to be there. Trial management, data handling, and data keeping. Here again, the sponsor has to establish two independent boards. The first is an independent data monitoring committee and a data and safety monitoring board. And these two would have to be independent of the main PIs or the main people who have designed the study. This is very important to protect our patients and also to ensure that the data that is collected and collated is absolutely perfect. Now, often you will hear that a clinical trial has been prematurely terminated. That could happen because of two reasons. Number one, it
Because
could
of
be.
the unmute.
Can I request others to mute their mics, please? So that could be number one, because the drug is doing too well. If that is the case, we have no ethical right to deprive the control group from the benefits of the drug. Or if we find that there are signals that the drug is causing harm, then there is no point in continuing the study. So that again is responsibility of the sponsors, because they have created these two boards who would be actually looking at the data. The second thing is, nowadays all data is electronically handled, and we have what we call an ECRF, electronic case record form. And you have to have SOPs for all of this, because data safety is of utmost importance. And you just can't allow any Tom, Dick, and Harry to access that data. So all of that has to be defined: who is allowed to enter the data, who is allowed to make changes in case there are clerical errors that has happened, and there has to be a security system that prevents unauthorized access of data and safeguard the blinding. The other thing that is also needed is, in case of a medical emergency, there has to be a cleared SOP of how to unblind data. For example, I'm doing a trial on, say, GLP-1 analogs, and I now have two groups of people, one who's getting the active drug and the other who's on the placebo. Now, if the patient comes in with pain abdomen and gets hospitalized, it's important to understand and know, in the interest of the patient, whether the patient was on the active drug, because this could well be because of pancreatitis related to the drug. So there has to be a process through which unblinding of the data also has to be allowed. So trial data management, handling, and record keeping, that's again a very important issue. The first bit is obviously what has happened in a lot of cases, in spite of all these guidelines, is somebody's just gone on, sold off the data to somebody else. You can't do that. And for how long do you need to retain data? That is often specific to each of the trials. And whoever is planning to do a drug trial of sorts has to have facilities for data archiving. We'll talk about that a little later as well. The sponsor has to inform the investigator and the institution in writing for the need for record retention. Investigator selection, I've already told you about. Allocation of responsibilities. This is again a very, very important thing. So in the study documents, there will be a log of allocation of responsibilities. So at the site, the PI is responsible ultimately for everything, but then for each of the job responsibilities, he will have to allocate someone. It could be a co-PI, it could be a sub-I, it could be the pharmacist, or it could be a CRC, and next to that, person's responsibility, the name, the start date, and the stop date of those things have to be documented. So, for example, if the pharmacist is supposed to dispense the medicines, nobody else is allowed to do the same. Often you might have multiple people being given the responsibility for multiple jobs. But this is important so that we have accountability of who is doing what and who is responsible for what. The compensation to subjects and investigators, I have already talked about that the insurance paper document is something very important. Obviously, you don't want malpractices, but often there will be side effects or incidents for which there has to be adequate compensation that the sponsor needs to provide. Financing, I already told you that there's going to be a tripartite agreement for those of us working in government institutions. In each of the private setups, there might be different things because in the private setup, the PI is allowed to earn out of doing a clinical trial where there will be something called a PI fees. For those of us working in government institutes, the financial heads under which the payment is made is number one, research grant for the institute, number two, fees for the clinical trial coordinator and others working in the team. And then there would be things like fees for various investigations that are being done, particularly if it's getting outsourced somewhere else. There will be some amount of money that can be given as conveyance fees to the participant. It has to be reasonable. It can't be exorbitant because that would be looked at that you are paying to lure a patient to participate in a clinical trial. And remember, this entire money is again divided into installments. So there will be some amount paid for, say, pre-screening, screen success, first visit, second visit, and things like that. Just like you would pay when you're booking an apartment, you pay according to in installments. Notification and submission to regulatory authorities. I've already told you about the first set of notifications to the EC, but thereafter, notifications have to be sent to the local EC, to the sponsor, and the sponsor then sends that to the other sites as well as to the regulatory authorities. So, for example, if today we were doing a trial of, say, thalidomide in pregnancy, the fact that phocomelia and amelia happened would have been flagged up much earlier. It would not have happened in the manner that it happened at the time. So any notification, and also, for example, a serious adverse event. For example, last week we had a patient who had a patellar fracture who is on a GLP-1 trial. So confirmation of review, I've already explained to you how the entire process of application and approval by the institutional review board or institutional ethics committee happens. Now, in the dossier that the sponsor provides, they provide you a whole lot of information related to the investigational product. It will talk about all the studies that have taken place, phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, that has happened, animal model studies, cell studies, and all in the information that is there. And from time to time, they will also provide you with updates of new information that might have come in as the study is going on. And it will tell you about how to give the drug, in what dose, how to reconstitute, how to administer, whom to administer, how to stop, what tests to do. So everything, and how to store it, and all of those things will be given. The manufacturing, packaging, labeling, and coding, all of that is the responsibility of the sponsor. And you will have data loggers, temperature loggers, to try and ensure that the transportation, the reconstitution, the administration, the storage, all of that is perfect. And it is their responsibility to make it in such a manner that there is no inadvertent unblinding of the investigational product. Supply and handling of product. Now, it's the sponsor's responsibility to ensure that there is timely delivery of the investigation product. So, for example, a site has enrolled 10 patients, and the next visit is scheduled on time X. Now, during COVID, we had this problem. All of a sudden, we often ran out of investigational products, and those patients actually had to be taken out of the study because it was a treat to target. It was a per protocol analysis study and not an intention to treat study. To ensure steps that the investigational products are stable. In now today's world, all the refrigerators have temperature loggers. They are logged onto the internet. Anytime there is a change in temperature, there will be an alert going to the CRO, the PI, to everybody. So to ensure that all of that is there. Now, at the end of the study, it's also very important to dispose unused investigational product because that can be a biohazard. Record access. So I've already told you that the records should be kept properly, and everybody who has the right has access to the records. This includes the monitor, the auditor, the ethics committee, and also the regulatory authorities. Safety information. The sponsor is also responsible for the ongoing safety evaluation of the investigation product. I already told you, any adverse event that is reported, a SUSAR or a serious adverse event, anything that's reported in any of the trial sites gets reported to all of the other trial sites. And then they send it to the PI. The PI then sends a copy to the ethics committee. Now, who can stop the clinical trial at this point of time? Either the PI might think, okay, too many people are getting this particular side effect. I don't want to subject my patients to any further risk. He can decide and say, I'm not going to continue the trial. The ethics committee might say, you are sending the same side effect of this drug from everybody all over the world, from Brazil, from China. I think enough is enough. We are not going to allow you to continue the trial. So they can stop. The sponsors themselves might say, okay, we think there might be a signal. We are not going to continue with the study. Or the regulatory authority might say, things are not good. We will not allow you to continue the study. So the adverse drug reaction reporting again is the responsibility of both the PI as well as the sponsor to the respective authority, not just to the ethics committee, but also the regulatory authorities. Audit. Now, this is a very important part. Now, the sponsors themselves have an audit. It could be from their own organization. It could be from an independent organization. Also, there could be audit from the regulatory authorities. Now, again, what kind of audit, how frequently you're going to do the audit is going to be dependent on a number of factors. How important is the clinical trial? For example, if this is on a vulnerable population, obviously it becomes very important that you're actually following everything. The number of subjects in a trial, you have a study which has only 2 people in your clinical trial. Probably you will not face too much of an external audit. Now, there are 10 sites, each of them have recruited 5 people, you have recruited 55 people. That rings alarm bells. You're probably going to face a bigger audit. The type and the complexity of the trial. For example, you're doing a cardiovascular outcome trial where the end point is death. Of course, it becomes a very, very serious trial, right? And the levels of risk, like I said, and any identified problem. If, for example, the auditor in the previous audit came and saw there were serious problems with, say, consenting or other things, then it's going to be a bigger problem. And the sponsor appoints monitors, and also there is an established protocol, of course, beyond which there can be more audits. And every time the monitor comes, he writes a written report and goes back and tells about the site and also informs the PI and the ethics committee. So what is essentially monitoring? The act of overseeing the progress of a clinical trial and ensuring that it is conducted, recorded, and reported in accordance to the protocol of the study, the agreed upon SOPs, the good GCP guidelines, and all the applicable regulatory requirements. The purpose is, most importantly, that the rights and well-being of the subjects are protected. The reported trial data is accurate, complete, and verifiable from the source data, and the conduct of the trial is in compliance with the currently approved protocols with GCP and the applicable requirements. So the monitoring often happens in 4 phases. The first, I told you already, that during the feasibility, to assess feasibility of the study, often there is a pre-study feasibility visit. Then usually there is one at the initiation of the study to make sure that everything is in place. And then there can be multiple interim audits depending on the seriousness, the duration, the number of people involved. And finally, at the end, there is often, again, a mandatory closeout visit to make sure that all things have been archived properly, the unused material is returned, documents are taken back, all unused products are taken back, and archiving is done properly. Now, during the process of audit, they will verify that the SOPs are in place, the quality control and quality assurance of everything, including reagents, equipments are there, appropriate storage of specimens, the IP, the functionality of equipment. You are writing down the weight of the patient and they come and find that your weighing machine doesn't work. Tracking down specimen results from the case record form. With regards to the investigational product, they will see whether the storage and conditions are applicable, whether the right patients are actually getting the drug, we were giving the right instructions to the patients about the handling of the drug, and everything is controlled and documented, and at the end of the study, disposition of unused investigation product is done properly. And they will also verify that the investigator and the investigator trial staff are performing the right duties according to the delegation log in accordance with the approved protocol, and no unauthorized person was doing an unauthorized job, and investigator was enrolling only the eligible subjects, informed consent was taken properly, and that verifying that source data is complete, accurate, up to date. I'll talk about source data. I'm not going to talk about informed consent, that's been documented. So what is source data? So source data is anything and everything from which the data has been collected and put into the case record form. So for example, in a clinical trial, you say, this is a 56-year-old male with 10 years history of diabetes. That would have to be corroborated with a document. It could be an outpatient clinic data, which shows the age and the gender of the person. And in the history, it is written down, duration of diabetes is 10 years. Now, if there is a discordance from the source data, then that's not acceptable. And you've talked about laboratory results, patient complaining of hypoglycemia, blood pressure being something. So all of that, or X-ray showing that there was evidence of tuberculosis. So anything that is written in the case record form has to be verified from the source document. This is absolutely essential. And you cannot enter any information into the case record form unless and until there is a supporting source document. So this is one thing that we all struggle with, that is the case record form verification from the source document. It has to be correct, accurately reported, whatever dose change and therapy change you've done, that has to be documented, adverse event, concomitant medication, intercurrent illness, all of that has to be there. If somebody could not do a test, if somebody could not come on a certain day, that has to be documented, as well as to why. All withdrawals and dropouts have to be reported and also explained, and inform investigator of CRF entry error. So the monitor is more of a man-eater. He's paranoid. He's going to come and look at all of these things very, very carefully and ensure appropriate corrections, because we are human. We often make mistakes. But if there has been a mistake, has that been appropriately cut out? Has that been appropriately initiated by investigator or designee? So the common problem that we often find is that the data is directly entered into the case record form. The medical history is either an abstract or it's a Mahabharat. And the source document and the CRF, there is mismatch. There's handwriting like mine, which you can hardly read. So all of that has to be avoidable. So during the monitoring visit, deviations are very carefully documented, and communicating deviations to the investigator and sponsors, whatever deviations you've had from the protocol, SOP, GCP, or other regulatory requirement, and take appropriate actions to prevent the same. Non-compliance, if very trivial, often is okay, preferably avoided. But if it is bad, it could be really serious. It could lead to a lot of legal action, including not just the investigator being blacklisted or the institute being blacklisted, and the clinical trial being terminated because of non-compliance. So premature termination or suspension of a trial, I have already told you. Post-trial, it is important that the trial provisions must be arranged by sponsors and researchers to be provided by themselves, healthcare or governments, who are still need intervention identified as beneficial and safe. Here was this gentleman who was part of this clinical trial being taken care of by you in the study, treated for diabetes. Now the trial has ended. It's our moral responsibility and ethical duty as well to ensure that the individual continues to get medical care and support from your institute. Exceptions to this requirement must be approved by a research ethics committee. Specific information about post-trial provisions must be disclosed to participants as part of the informed consent. You need to tell them, once it ends, we will not be able to give this drug, even if it provides great results, something like that. So clinical trial results. This is again a mandatory requirement. You come up with a negative study and then the sponsor decides, I'm not going to publish this because it's going to hurt me. You can't do that. It's moral responsibility of sponsors to even publish negative results. It could be in part of a clinical trial publication. It could be a legal requirement, as it is on the CTRI, you have to report the results. So, and you have to also let the patients know about what has happened in the trial. The sponsor should ensure that the clinical trial reports in marketing applications meet the standard of ICH and the consent of clinical study reports. So to conclude, ultimately the sponsor ensures GCP compliance in clinical trials by implementing quality control and quality assurance. Monitoring and audits are intended to increase subject protection and integrity of data with quality risk management as the new approach. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much for this wonderful deliberation. So as we are taking questions at the end of the session, that is during our panel discussion, we'll move forward towards the next scientific session. And I think you had already highlighted different aspects, and you had also mentioned in one of your slides how to manage adverse event during the clinical trial. Especially that slide was there with our Professor Sucheta Kurunkar madam also, when she was telling about investigators' responsibility.